It was a quiet afternoon when a single father decided to take his little daughter for a walk through the town. He often did this on weekends, not because there was anywhere special to go, but because he believed fresh air and simple walks made life brighter for both of them. Raising a child alone wasn't easy, but he tried his best to give her a sense of warmth and stability. They didn't have much money, but he made up for it with love, patience, and attention. The little girl, full of energy, skipped along the sidewalk while holding his hand, pointing at shop windows, street performers, and every little thing that caught her eyes. As they reached a busier street corner, the girl suddenly stopped. Her eyes had landed on something that didn't fit into the cheerful rhythm of their walk. Just a few feet away, sitting quietly on the cold pavement, was a young woman holding a baby wrapped in a thin blanket. The woman looked tired, her clothes worn, her face pale. But despite her exhaustion, she held the baby close to her chest, rocking gently as if shielding the child from the world around them. The little girl tugged on her father's sleeve and pointed directly at them. "Daddy, why are they sitting on the ground? Don't they have a home?" Her voice carried pure innocence, but her question hit the father's heart like a heavy stone. For a moment, he didn't know how to respond. How could he explain to his young daughter that not everyone had a safe place to return to at night? How could he tell her that life could be cruel, stripping people of security and comfort until all they had left was the strength to survive? He looked back at the woman. Her eyes met his briefly, and in them he saw a mixture of pride and pain. She didn't reach out to ask for help, didn't hold up a sign, didn't beg. She just sat there quietly, hoping maybe someone would notice, but too proud to plead. The baby in her arms stirred, and she adjusted the blanket to keep the little one warm. The girl tugged again. "Daddy, can we help them?" The father bent down to meet his daughter's gaze. "They don't have a home right now," he said softly. "Sometimes life is hard for people. But yes, we can try to help." He straightened and walked over to the woman. She looked up again, wary at first. He offered a gentle smile and asked, "Would you like something to eat?" "My daughter and I are on our way to grab a snack." For a second, the woman hesitated, then gave a small nod. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice was almost hoarse, as if she hadn't spoken to anyone kindly in a long time. The father guided his daughter into a nearby bakery. The smell of freshly baked bread filled the air, and the girl pressed her nose against the glass case, pointing at muffins and rolls. But instead of buying just for themselves, the father ordered extra sandwiches, a loaf of bread, and 2 bottles of water. He carried the bag out and placed it gently beside the woman. Her eyes widened. She clutched the food with trembling hands and immediately opened a sandwich, not for herself but for the baby. She tore off a soft piece of bread and carefully fed it in tiny bites. Watching this, the father felt something stir inside him. Admiration for her quiet strength, sadness for her situation, and a deep sense of responsibility he hadn't expected to feel that day. The little girl crouched down and smiled at the baby. "Hi," she said softly. The baby, with curious wide eyes, stared back and let out a small giggle. The sound was light and innocent, a sound that belonged in a nursery, not on a cold street corner. "What's your baby's name?" the girl asked. The woman hesitated again, then answered quietly. The father listened, nodding as though he wanted to remember every detail. He introduced himself and his daughter, keeping the moment simple and kind. As they sat together for a while, the father gently asked how she had ended up here. At first, she avoided his eyes, but the warmth in his voice made her lower her guard. She explained in short pieces, not wanting to burden them but needing someone to listen. She had once had a job, a small apartment, and dreams of building a safe life for her child. But after the baby was born, everything fell apart. Her job slipped away, bills piled up, and with no family nearby, she had no one to turn to. One step at a time, she was pushed onto the street, and shelters were always too full to take them in. The father nodded slowly, listening without judgment. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to fix her story with quick words. He just listened, and in his silence she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Dignity. His daughter, not fully understanding the weight of the woman's story, simply reached out her small hand and touched the baby's blanket. "He's so cute," she said with a smile. The woman's eyes softened. For the first time that day, she let out a small, genuine laugh. The father felt his chest tighten. He knew what his daughter was thinking even before she said it. She looked up at him and whispered, "Daddy, can't they come with us? They need a home." Her words were simple, but they carried a truth he couldn't ignore. He glanced at the woman, then back at his daughter. He didn't answer right away. Inside, he was torn. He already carried the weight of raising his child alone, balancing work, bills, and parenting. Inviting strangers into their life wasn't a small decision, yet looking at the woman holding her baby, he couldn't shake the thought that fate had placed them here for a reason. The street grew busier as people rushed by, some glancing at the woman, most ignoring her. But the father and his daughter stayed. They stayed long enough for the woman to realize that someone truly saw her, not just as another homeless figure blending into the background, but as a mother, a human being fighting for her child. When it was time to leave, the father stood and offered her one last kind smile. "We'll see you again," he promised gently. She nodded, clutching the baby close. His daughter waved cheerfully and the baby giggled once more. As they walked away, the little girl looked up at him. "Daddy," she said firmly, "we have to help them. We can't just leave them there." The father didn't answer right away. His mind was already racing, thinking of what he could do, what he should do, and whether he was ready to change not only his life but his daughter's as well. He knew one thing for certain. Their walk that afternoon had started out like any other, but it had ended in a way that would change everything. The next morning, the father found himself thinking about the young woman and her baby. He had promised his daughter they would see them again, but he had not expected how strongly that promise would weigh on him. As he made breakfast, his little girl asked, "Daddy, are we going to find them today?" Her eyes were bright and hopeful, and he could hear the urgency in her voice. He wanted to be careful with his words. He didn't want to make promises he couldn't keep. "We'll walk by the same place later," he said softly. "Maybe they'll still be there." All through the day, his mind kept drifting back to the image of the woman holding her baby, sitting quietly while life moved past her. He thought about how fragile the baby had looked, bundled in that thin blanket. He thought about the mother's silence, the way she carried herself with both pride and exhaustion. And he thought about his daughter's words from the day before. "We can't just leave them there." By the afternoon, he and his daughter were on the same street corner again. The woman was still there in the same spot, her baby sleeping against her chest. The father noticed how the baby's little face was pressed against the fabric, peaceful but vulnerable. His daughter let go of his hand and skipped over without hesitation. "Hello," she said cheerfully, crouching down to see the baby again. The woman looked up, surprised, and then her face softened with recognition. "You came back," she said quietly. The father gave her a small smile. "We said we would." He set down another bag of food they had picked up along the way, this time some fruit, sandwiches, and juice. The woman thanked him softly, and once again she immediately made sure her baby was fed first before even thinking of herself. They sat down on the edge of the pavement together. For a while, the little girl chatted happily about school, about how she had drawn a picture of the baby last night, and how she wanted to show it. The woman listened, her tired eyes brightening for the first time. The father gently asked more about her story. He didn't want to pry, but he felt it was important to understand. The woman explained in fragments. She had once rented a small room while working at a cafe, but after her pregnancy, she could not keep up with the job. The baby's father had disappeared from their lives even before the birth. With no family nearby and bills piling up, she fell behind on rent. Soon the landlord asked her to leave. She tried shelters, but they were overcrowded or only allowed individuals, not mothers with babies. Every time she thought she found a solution, a door seemed to close in her face. Listening, the father's heart grew heavier. He thought about how many nights she must have spent worrying if her baby would be warm enough or safe enough. He couldn't imagine the fear of holding a child in your arms and not knowing where to sleep the next day. The little girl interrupted with her innocent voice. "But why doesn't anyone help you?" "Grown-ups are supposed to help." The woman blinked, her eyes glistening. She tried to smile, but her lips trembled. "Sometimes people don't see us," she said quietly. "Sometimes they just walk by." The father could feel his daughter's small hand squeeze his. She looked up at him with determination. He knew that look. She wasn't going to let this go. As the sun began to set, he realized they couldn't just keep bringing food every day. It wasn't enough. His daughter's drawing from the night before came to mind, the picture where she had drawn not just him and herself, but also the woman and her baby, all together. At the time, he had smiled at her imagination, but now he wondered if children sometimes saw things more clearly than adults did. On their way back home, his daughter was unusually quiet. Finally, she spoke. "Daddy, she's a good mom. I can tell. She loves her baby. Why can't they stay with us?" He sighed, not because he disagreed, but because the decision was bigger than his daughter could understand. He already carried the weight of single parenting. His income barely stretched to cover their own needs, and yet the thought of leaving that woman and her baby outside again made his stomach twist. That night, after putting his daughter to bed, he sat alone in the kitchen. He thought about his own struggles, the nights he stayed awake wondering how to pay bills, the mornings he doubted if he was giving his daughter enough, and yet, even in his hardest moments, he always had a roof over his head. He couldn't stop picturing the young woman sitting in the cold, cradling her child with nothing but a blanket. The next few days, he found himself returning to the same spot, bringing food and sitting with them for a while. Each time, his daughter grew more attached to the baby, playing peekaboo, making little faces, and giggling when the baby responded with laughter. The bond between the children was instant and natural, as if they had known each other for longer than a few days. One evening, after walking home, his daughter showed him another drawing. This one was of their small apartment. She had drawn her own bed in one corner, his bed in another, and in the middle, she had drawn a crib for the baby. "See, Daddy," she explained, "there's room for them." Her simple faith and kindness made his chest ache. Children didn't complicate love with fear or doubt. They just opened their hearts. By the end of that week, the father knew he couldn't avoid the decision any longer. He had a choice. Keep walking by, pretending that food and kind words were enough, or take a step further, even if it meant stepping into unknown territory. He had no clear plan, no guarantee of how it would work. But he knew one thing. If his daughter could see the need so clearly, maybe he was meant to act on it. That night, as he sat at the kitchen table once again, he whispered to himself, "Sometimes, doing the right thing doesn't wait until we're ready. It just shows up and we have to answer." The next morning, he held his daughter's hand a little tighter as they walked toward the street corner. The woman was there, as always, her baby snuggled in her arms. This time, the father's steps slowed as he approached. He wasn't sure how he would say it, or even if she would accept. But he knew he had to try. The morning felt different. The father walked with his daughter as they headed back toward the same street corner, but this time there was a weight in his chest. He had spent days wrestling with the decision, nights thinking about risks and responsibilities. Yet when he saw the woman again, sitting in the same spot with her baby tucked safely in her arms, something inside him pushed him forward. His daughter rushed ahead, waving happily. The baby stretched and let out a small laugh, recognizing the little girl's voice. The woman smiled faintly. It was a tired smile, but it was also the kind that showed gratitude for being remembered. The father sat down beside her. For a while, they just watched people walk past, most of them too busy to notice. He finally cleared his throat and spoke, carefully choosing his words. "I don't want to overstep, but I've been thinking. You and your baby shouldn't have to stay out here every night. I know it's not much, but we have a small apartment. If you're willing, you could come stay for a while, at least until you get back on your feet." The woman's eyes widened in shock. She looked down at her baby, then back at him, her face filled with hesitation. I couldn't. You don't even know me." Her voice shook, not out of anger, but disbelief. "I know," he said gently. "And I know it sounds strange. But I've seen the way you care for your child. I see how strong you are, even in this situation. My daughter keeps asking if we can help, and honestly, I can't ignore it anymore. We don't have a lot, but we can share what we do have." She shook her head, almost in tears. "I don't want to be a burden. You already have your own life. Your little girl. She needs you. I can't come in and take away from that." Before he could respond, his daughter chimed in with her innocent certainty. "You won't take away anything. We have room. I already drew a crib for the baby." She grinned, remembering her drawing from the night before. The woman's lips trembled. She pulled the baby closer, her eyes darting as though searching for reasons to say no. But she also saw the truth, the sincerity in the man's voice, the openness in the child's heart. Finally, she whispered, "Are you sure?" The father nodded. "I wouldn't offer if I wasn't." Tears welled in her eyes. She had been carrying the weight of survival for so long it felt unreal that someone would not only notice her, but also open their home. She swallowed hard and whispered, "Thank you. I don't even know what to say." "You don't have to say anything right now," he replied softly. "Just come with us. Let's get you somewhere warm." The little girl reached out her hand to the baby, giggling when the tiny fingers curled around hers. "See? We're already friends," she said proudly. With slow, cautious steps, the woman stood, adjusting the blanket around her baby. She carried only a small worn bag with a few items inside. That was all she owned. The father felt a pang in his chest, imagining how everything important in her life could be carried in one hand. The walk back to their apartment was quiet but not uncomfortable. The little girl skipped ahead, humming to herself while the woman walked carefully, still unsure if she was making the right decision. She kept glancing at the father, as though waiting for him to change his mind. But he never did. He kept walking, steady and calm, making sure she felt safe. When they reached the small apartment, the father unlocked the door and gestured for her to come inside. She hesitated at the doorway, looking around at the modest space. It wasn't fancy, just a small living room, a tiny kitchen, and 2 bedrooms, but it felt warm and alive. "You can sit here," the father said, motioning toward the couch. The woman slowly lowered herself down, still holding her baby tightly. Her eyes darted around, taking in the framed pictures on the wall, the toys scattered on the floor, the drawings taped to the fridge. It was simple, but it was a home. The little girl ran to her room and returned with a stuffed bear. She proudly handed it to the baby. "You can borrow this, he's really soft," she said, her voice filled with generosity. The woman bit her lip, overcome with emotion. She hugged the baby and the stuffed bear together, whispering thank you again and again. That evening, the father made a simple dinner, pasta with vegetables. As they ate together, the atmosphere slowly shifted from hesitation to a kind of tentative comfort. The baby laughed. The little girl chattered about school, and for the first time in a long while, the woman relaxed her shoulders. She didn't feel like a stranger at that table. Later, after the children had fallen asleep, the baby in a makeshift crib fashioned out of blankets and the girl in her own bed, the woman sat with the father in the quiet living room. "I don't understand why you're helping us," she admitted. "People usually look the other way. Why risk so much for me and my child?" The father leaned back, thoughtful. "Because once, someone helped me when I needed it most. I don't forget that. And because my daughter reminded me that sometimes the simplest choice is to care. She doesn't see strangers, she sees people. Maybe we all should." The woman's eyes filled with tears. She wiped them quickly, embarrassed. "I've been so afraid of being judged, of being seen as a failure, of not being enough for my baby. But tonight, for the first time in months, I feel safe." He nodded quietly. "Then maybe this is where things start to change." In the days that followed, the household found a new rhythm. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of awkwardness, moments where the woman felt she was intruding, and moments where the father wondered how he would manage. But each time doubt crept in, the sight of the 2 children together washed it away. His daughter treated the baby like a sibling, playing, laughing, and even helping with small tasks. The woman, in return, offered to cook, clean, and contribute in any way she could, though the father insisted she focus on resting and planning her next steps. At night, when the apartment grew quiet, the father often found himself reflecting. He had taken a leap into the unknown, unsure if it was wise or sustainable. Yet something about having them there felt right, as if life had unexpectedly expanded to make room for more love. For the woman, each day under that roof was both a relief and a challenge. Relief because her baby finally had warmth, food, and laughter. Challenge because she had to confront her own fears and accept kindness without guilt. She began to believe that maybe she was not as alone as she thought. The little girl, meanwhile, never questioned anything. To her it was simple. They had seen someone in need and now they were family. Children didn't complicate things with what-ifs and maybes. They just loved, openly and completely. One evening, as they all sat together after dinner, the little girl looked at her father and asked innocently, "So, are we a bigger family now?" The father looked at the woman, then at the two children sitting side by side. He smiled softly. "Yes," he said, "I think we are." The woman's eyes glistened and she lowered her head to hide her emotions. But in her heart she felt something she had nearly forgotten. Hope. That night, as the baby slept peacefully in the borrowed crib and the apartment grew quiet again, she whispered to herself, "Maybe tomorrow will be brighter." And for the first time in a long time, she truly believed it. The first week of living together felt like a new chapter for all of them. There was an unspoken understanding that this arrangement was temporary, but the warmth in the apartment made it feel like something more. The young mother was careful not to overstep. Every morning she woke early, often before the father and his daughter, to make breakfast or tidy the living room. It was her way of showing gratitude, though the father told her more than once she didn't need to. Still, she insisted, "I need to do something. I can't just take without giving back." Her voice always carried both gratitude and pride. The father respected that. He knew how important it was for her to feel like more than someone being helped. And his daughter, of course, thought it was wonderful. She loved waking up to find pancakes on the table or seeing the baby giggle at silly faces while she got ready for school. But beneath the surface of this new rhythm, there were challenges. Sharing a small apartment with another adult and a baby meant there was little privacy, and sometimes tensions rose quietly. The baby would cry late at night, and though the mother tried her best to comfort him quickly, the sound often woke the father and his daughter. On those nights, the woman would apologize again and again, whispering, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," as she rocked her baby in the dim light. The father always shook his head gently. "You don't need to apologize. Babies cry. That's life." Still, he saw how guilty she felt, as if every sound her child made was an inconvenience. During the day, the father balanced his job with caring for his daughter. Now he also helped keep an eye on the baby when the mother needed a few moments to rest or handle paperwork for assistance programs. At times it stretched him thin, but he never complained. Instead, he found himself unexpectedly enjoying the little moments, like holding the baby on his lap while he read to both children, or laughing at the chaos of toys scattered across the living room floor. One Saturday morning, the little girl tugged at his sleeve while he was fixing breakfast. "Daddy, can we go to the park today?" "All of us!" Her excitement was contagious, and soon the idea turned into a plan. At the park, the children played together while the father and the young mother sat on a bench watching. For the first time, she looked almost at peace. The sunlight softened her face, and as she watched her baby laugh, she whispered, "I'd forgotten how it feels to see him play like this without worry." The father glanced at her. "You deserve moments like this." "He does too." She looked down at her hands, then at him. "It's strange. For so long, I felt invisible. People walked past us every day and it was like we didn't exist. But here, it's different. I don't feel invisible anymore." Her words stayed with him long after they returned home. It wasn't just about shelter and food. It was about dignity, about being seen as human again. Over the following weeks, the mother grew more determined to find stability. She started applying for jobs, using the father's old laptop to fill out applications late into the night. She faced rejection after rejection, but she didn't give up. Each morning she woke with renewed determination, telling herself she had to build a future for her baby. The father quietly supported her, offering encouragement when her spirits dipped. He admired her persistence. It wasn't easy starting over with nothing, yet she kept trying. The little girl, meanwhile, treated the baby like her own sibling. She showed him her toys, shared her snacks, and even insisted on helping when it was time for a nap. Sometimes she would sneak into the living room to watch the baby sleep, whispering softly, "Don't worry, you're safe now." Those moments touched the mother deeply. She often found herself fighting back tears at the kindness of this child who had accepted her and her baby without hesitation. But not every day was easy. Money was tighter than ever. Groceries disappeared quickly with another mouth to feed. and the father found himself working extra hours just to make sure the fridge stayed full. He never complained, but the exhaustion showed on his face some nights. The mother noticed and offered to contribute by cleaning houses or doing odd jobs. At first he refused, not wanting her to feel pressured. But she insisted, "Please, I need to stand on my own 2 feet. Let me try." So she began picking up small jobs when she could, leaving the baby in the father's care for short stretches. It wasn't much, but it gave her hope. Every bit she earned went into a small envelope she kept tucked away, labeled Future. One evening, as they all sat around the table eating a simple dinner of rice and vegetables, the little girl suddenly announced, "I think we're a team now." Her words made everyone laugh, but there was truth in them. Slowly, without realizing it, they had become something like a family. Still, the mother often reminded herself that this wasn't permanent. She told the father one night, "I don't want to overstay. As soon as I can, I'll move out. You've already done more than enough." The father looked at her steadily. "Don't rush because of pride. Take the time you need. Nobody here is keeping count." She nodded but didn't reply. Deep down, part of her longed to stay. Yet another part feared relying too much on someone else. She had been let down before, and trust was something she was still learning to rebuild. One rainy evening, the power flickered out in their apartment. They lit candles and huddled together in the living room. The little girl begged for stories, so the father told one about when he was a child. Then, surprisingly, the mother began to share stories from her own childhood. Funny moments, small adventures, and the dreams she once had. For the first time, she opened up more fully, her laughter filling the dimly lit room. The father watched her and realized how much she had changed in the short time she had been with them. She was no longer just the tired woman on the sidewalk. She was strong, hopeful, and slowly rediscovering her own voice. The little girl leaned against her father, whispering, "She's happy now." And in that quiet moment, he knew his daughter was right. But even with laughter and new memories, challenges loomed ahead. There were questions about the future, where the mother would work, how she would afford her own place, and whether this fragile arrangement could last. The father sometimes lay awake at night, wondering if he had taken on more than he could handle. And yet, when he heard the sound of the baby breathing softly in the next room or his daughter giggling with joy, he knew he wouldn't change his choice. The apartment wasn't just a shelter anymore. It was a place of healing, a place where strangers had slowly become family, and though none of them knew what tomorrow might bring, they were beginning to believe that together, they could face it. The weeks turned into months, and slowly, the small apartment began to feel like home, not just for the father and his daughter, but for the young mother and her baby too. What had started as a simple act of kindness had grown into a bond that none of them could have imagined at first. The mother had started a part-time job at a local cafe. It wasn't glamorous or highly paid, but it gave her a sense of independence she hadn't felt in months. She woke each morning determined, the baby bundled up and ready for the day. She thanked the father for watching over him while she worked, and he always responded with a simple, "We're a team." Don't forget that. The little girl took on the role of big sister with delight. She would help with the baby, fetch diapers, or hold him while the mother prepared breakfast. Watching her interactions, the father sometimes felt like he was witnessing magic, the innocence of a child teaching grown-ups about unconditional love. Evenings were filled with laughter and stories. Sometimes they cooked together. Sometimes they just sat on the couch and talked about their days. The mother's eyes no longer carried the same weight of fear and exhaustion. She had begun to hope. And the father, who had once doubted whether he could manage the added responsibility, found himself grateful for the fullness in his life. One morning, as they sat together eating breakfast, the mother spoke softly. "I've been thinking," she said. "I don't want to just get by. I want to plan for the future for both of us." The father nodded, understanding immediately. "What do you have in mind?" "I want a place of our own. Somewhere the baby can run and play. Somewhere we don't have to worry about rent or being turned away," she said, her voice filled with quiet determination. He smiled, proud of her resolve. "Then we'll make a plan. Step by step, we'll figure it out together." Over the next several weeks, they worked as a team. The father helped her fill out housing applications while she continued to work and save. The little girl kept the baby entertained while the adults handled paperwork, never complaining, always cheerful. Every small victory, a completed form, an interview, an accepted application, was celebrated as a family. The mother's confidence grew as she began to see that she could provide for her child. She no longer carried the heavy burden of fear that had shadowed every decision, and the father, watching her transformation, realized that sometimes the act of giving wasn't about money or possessions. It was about believing in someone when they couldn't believe in themselves. One rainy afternoon, as the three of them returned from the cafe where the mother worked, the father noticed the little girl walking hand in hand with the baby, laughing at some silly comment the mother made. The image warmed his heart. He thought back to the day they had first met the mother and baby on that cold street corner, how unsure he had felt, and how hesitant she had been to accept help. Now the fear was gone, replaced by trust, laughter, and a shared sense of belonging. The day finally came when the mother was approved for a small apartment of her own. It was modest, but it had walls that were hers, space for her child to play safely, and a sense of independence she had longed for. The father helped with the move, carrying boxes and toys while his daughter ran around making sure the baby didn't crawl into danger. When they finally stepped into the new apartment, the mother paused, taking it all in. For a moment, she just stood there, holding her baby close. Then she turned to the father and said softly, "I can't thank you enough. Not just for the roof, but for showing me that people can care." The father shook his head, smiling. "It wasn't just me. It was your strength, too. You got through the hardest part, and I just helped you find your way." The little girl, carrying a small toy to place in the baby's new crib, looked up at him and said proudly, "See, Daddy? We're still a family even if we live in two places now." And she was right. Family wasn't about living in the same apartment. It was about the love, support, and connection they had built together. Over the following months, the mother settled into her new home. She adjusted to the routine, balancing work and motherhood. The father and his daughter visited often, sharing meals, playing with the baby, and simply being together. The bonds they had formed didn't fade. They only grew stronger. The mother also began to dream again. She imagined a life where her baby could go to school without fear, where she could save for small luxuries, and where the shadows of her past struggles wouldn't always feel so close. And each time she allowed herself to dream, she remembered the kindness that had given her that chance. For the father, life was different too. He had opened his home and heart to people in need, and in doing so, he had gained more than he could have imagined. His daughter learned lessons about empathy, compassion, and the power of simple acts of kindness, and he himself had discovered that love could expand to include those who were once strangers. One evening, as they all sat in the living room of the mother's new apartment, the father reflected on the journey. He remembered the first time they had met, the cold streets, the hesitation and the fear. He thought about the little girl pointing out the homeless mother and baby, insisting they help. And he realized that sometimes life presents opportunities, disguised as challenges, opportunities to act with courage and kindness. The mother looked around at the two children playing together on the floor and then at him. "I don't know if I could ever repay you," she said. Her voice was soft, but her eyes glistened with emotion. "You don't have to," he said. "Just live, be happy, and take care of your child. That's enough." The little girl, sensing the seriousness of the moment, gave the mother a big hug. "We're always family," she said, her words simple but full of truth. And in that small apartment, with laughter echoing off the walls and the baby cooing in the background, they all understood something important. Family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about the people who show up, who care, and who choose to love despite the odds. The mother whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude that night, feeling safe, seen, and hopeful for the first time in years. The father walked home later, hand in hand with his daughter, smiling as he thought about the journey they had shared. It had started with a simple walk, a pointed finger, and an act of compassion, but it had grown into something enduring, a family built not by chance, but by choice. And so life moved forward. The little girl still drew pictures of her family, now including both homes and all the people she loved. The baby grew stronger, more confident, and always happy in the presence of people who loved him. The mother thrived, working and planning for the future. And the father, though busy and often tired, felt a sense of fulfillment he had never known before. They had faced challenges, uncertainty, and fear. They had stretched themselves, given trust, and accepted help. And in the end, they discovered a truth that was both simple and profound. Kindness has the power to change lives, courage has the power to create hope, and love, no matter how unexpected, has the power to make strangers into family. The story didn't end with grand celebrations or wealth. It ended with quiet moments of laughter, shared meals, bedtime stories, and the daily acts of caring that truly define a family. And sometimes, that is more than enough. The little girl, tucked in her bed that night, whispered a soft good night to the baby through the monitor. The mother watched them sleep, a small smile on her lips. And the father, standing at the doorway, simply nodded to himself, knowing that sometimes the smallest decisions, the choice to stop and care, to open a home, to trust, can change the course of many lives forever. And in that moment, as quiet filled the apartment and hearts were full, it felt like home in the truest sense of the word. The months that followed were a time of growth, not just for the young mother and her baby, but for the father and his daughter as well. Life had settled into a rhythm, though it was far from perfect. The apartment the mother had rented was small, but it was theirs, and it carried a sense of safety that had been missing for so long. The father's daughter had fully embraced her role as a little sister to the baby. She woke up early each morning, often before anyone else, to check on him, brush his tiny hair, and make sure he had breakfast before the day began. She delighted in the responsibility, treating it as both a game and a duty. The baby responded, with giggles and babbles forming a bond that seemed unshakable. The mother, meanwhile, worked hard at her job, her confidence growing with each passing day. She had learned to manage her time carefully, balancing work, childcare, and household responsibilities. Each evening, she returned home tired but proud, carrying not only the weight of her labor but also the joy of providing for her child. The father admired her quietly. He saw her strength, her determination, and her resilience, and he felt a deep respect for the way she handled life's challenges. He had known kindness could help someone survive, but he was discovering that compassion could help someone thrive. Despite the progress, there were still challenges. Money was tight, and sometimes small disagreements flared over responsibilities or household tasks. The little girl, though usually cheerful, occasionally felt frustrated when the baby cried for hours, or when her routines were disrupted. But these moments were fleeting, and they always found a way back to laughter and connection. One rainy afternoon, the father found himself watching the mother and children from the kitchen doorway. The mother was teaching the little girl how to make a simple snack, patiently guiding her hands while the baby sat in a high chair, clapping and cooing at every movement. The scene warmed his heart. He realized that family wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up, day after day, with patience and love. The little girl suddenly looked up and said, "Daddy, do you think we'll always be this way? Together?" He smiled, kneeling to meet her gaze. "I hope so," he said, "because family isn't just about where you live. It's about who you care for, who you love, and who loves you back. And right now, that's us." Her face lit up with a smile, and she turned to the baby, whispering, "See? We're a family, forever." The mother, overhearing this, felt a lump in her throat. She hadn't imagined this level of connection when she first met them on the street corner. Life had been hard, lonely, and uncertain. Yet here she was, sharing meals, laughter, and quiet evenings with people who had chosen to love her and her child without hesitation. Over time, she began to take small steps toward long-term stability. She saved a portion of her earnings, gradually building a small cushion for emergencies. She started to look for opportunities to grow in her career, asking questions, learning new skills, and showing initiative at work. Each achievement, no matter how small, was a victory, a step toward independence and self-sufficiency. The father supported her quietly, giving advice only when asked and offering encouragement whenever she faltered. He marveled at how capable she was becoming, realizing that his role was not just to provide shelter or food, but to provide space for her growth. The little girl also thrived in this environment. She learned lessons about empathy, responsibility, and resilience that went beyond school or books. She understood that people weren't always treated fairly in the world, but that love and action could make a real difference. And she was learning firsthand that family could be chosen, built, and strengthened through care and attention. One evening, the mother shared a memory with the father, a memory she hadn't told anyone before. She spoke of her own childhood, how her parents had struggled, and how she had learned early on to rely on herself. The father listened carefully, realizing that her strength wasn't just born of necessity. It was born of a lifetime of challenges she had faced and overcome. "You've done so much for us," she said quietly, "not just helping me survive, but helping me hope again." He shook his head. "I didn't do it alone. You fought every step of the way. I just helped you see that you weren't alone." The baby gurgled happily, breaking the seriousness of the moment. The little girl laughed, bouncing up and down, and the mother smiled genuinely, feeling the warmth of a home she had once thought she would never have. As the months continued, small traditions began to form. Saturday mornings were for baking together. Sundays were for walks in the park. Even simple chores became moments of connection, with the children helping to set the table or fold laundry while the adults guided them with patience. The father noticed that the little girl had grown more thoughtful and empathetic. She would offer to help her mother with small tasks, check if the baby needed a diaper change, or bring water when someone was thirsty. She was learning that care wasn't just an idea, it was action, repeated day after day. Meanwhile, the mother's confidence continued to grow. She began to think about the future more seriously, not just survival, but possibilities. She dreamed of going back to school, improving her skills, and giving her child opportunities she had never had. And every time she spoke of these plans, the father encouraged her, reminding her that taking steps toward her dreams was just as important as keeping the family together. One day, the little girl asked, "Daddy, will we ever have a big house with a backyard so the baby can run around?" He laughed softly. "Maybe someday. But for now, we have each other, and that's the most important thing." The mother smiled at the exchange, feeling a warmth she hadn't known in years. They weren't wealthy, and life still presented obstacles, but they had stability, love, and hope. That was more than enough to build a life worth living. Challenges still appeared from time to time. Bills had to be paid, schedules had to be coordinated, and work could be exhausting. But instead of fear or despair, the family faced these challenges together. They learned that struggles were easier to endure when shared, and that support could be found in the most unexpected places. The father often reflected on how far they had come. He remembered the first day he and his daughter had encountered the young mother and her baby on the sidewalk, unsure what to do. He thought about the hesitation, the fear, and the uncertainty. And now, months later, he realized that those small steps, the decision to sit with them, to share food, and to offer shelter, had created a ripple effect that changed lives. The mother had grown into a confident parent and individual. The baby thrived, healthy and happy. And the little girl had learned a profound lesson in empathy and love that would stay with her for the rest of her life. One evening, as they all sat together after dinner, the father said quietly, "You know, when we first met, I never imagined we'd end up here. But now I can't imagine life any other way." The mother reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "Me neither," she said softly. "You gave us more than a home. You gave us a chance." The little girl grinned, bouncing her knee against the baby's. "See? We're all family now. We always will be." And in that simple statement, they all understood a truth that transcended words. Family wasn't just about living together or about blood. It was about showing up, caring, loving, and trusting. It was about choosing each other every day, even when life was hard. The months turned into a year, and their bond deepened. Birthdays were celebrated with small parties, laughter filled the rooms, and quiet moments of reflection reminded them of how far they had come. The mother saved enough to think about future education for herself, while the father saw his daughter growing into a kind and empathetic young girl. The baby learned to crawl, walk, and speak in his own time, surrounded by people who loved him unconditionally. One winter evening, as snow fell softly outside, the father and mother watched the children play with simple toys in the living room. They felt a sense of contentment, knowing that the chaos of life was always present, but that love had created a foundation strong enough to withstand it. "You know," the mother said softly, "I never thought I'd see a life like this. A life with hope, laughter, and a real family, the father nodded. And it all started with one choice. A choice to care. The little girl ran over, hugging both of them. "See? We're unstoppable together," she said. The mother laughed, hugging her back. "Yes, we are," she said. And in that small apartment, with the baby asleep nearby and snow falling outside, they understood something powerful. Life would always have challenges, but kindness, trust, and love could create a home that went far beyond walls and furniture. It was a home built in hearts, and so life went on. Days were filled with work, play, and learning. Nights were filled with warmth, stories, and laughter. And through it all, they remained a family, not because life demanded it, but because they had chosen it. Every single day, they had faced uncertainty, fear, and hardship, but they had also discovered hope, courage, and the beauty of human connection. And in the end, that was enough to make them whole. Life continued to evolve for the small family. While they had created a routine that felt stable, there was always the undercurrent of change, some expected, some unexpected, that shaped their lives. It was the kind of change that didn't announce itself with loud declarations, but crept in quietly like the passing seasons. The little girl had started school, and every day she came home with stories to share. Some of them were simple: who had the best crayons in class, who had the funniest shoes, but there were also moments of self-reflection, small pieces of wisdom that only a child could understand. One afternoon, she rushed through the door, holding a small piece of paper in her hand. "Daddy, guess what? I got a gold star today." Her excitement was contagious, and the father smiled, setting down the book he was reading. "That's amazing," he said, wrapping her up in a hug. "What did you do to earn it?" "I helped the new girl with her lunch, and she said I was nice," she said proudly, her eyes sparkling. The mother, who had just walked in from work, overheard and smiled warmly. She had seen her daughter become more confident and compassionate with each passing day. It was clear that the lessons of kindness and empathy weren't just being taught, they were being absorbed deeply. As the months passed, the little girl's world expanded. She made friends, joined school activities, and even began to take on small responsibilities at home, like helping her mother sort laundry or feeding the baby. She was growing into her own person, full of energy, curiosity, and a blossoming sense of independence. The mother watched with pride, amazed at how far they had come. It hadn't been that long ago that she was uncertain about her future, unsure of where she and her baby would end up. Now she had stability, a job, and a growing sense of self-worth. But with this new stability came challenges of their own. The cost of living had increased, and though the mother had a steady job, it wasn't always enough to cover everything. The father had been helping her with small financial tasks, offering advice on budgeting or finding the best deals. But even his efforts couldn't always close the gap. There were moments of stress. Some nights, when the children were asleep, the mother would sit at the kitchen table with bills spread out in front of her, trying to figure out how to stretch every dollar. The father noticed her tired eyes, but he never pushed. He simply offered her a warm cup of tea and listened. "I don't know how to make ends meet sometimes," she admitted one evening, her voice barely above a whisper. "It feels like I'm always playing catch-up." He sat beside her, taking her hand in his. "You're doing the best you can, and you're not alone in this. We'll figure it out together." It was moments like this that reminded her how far she had come. She had once thought she was in it alone, but now she was surrounded by a team, people who cared and who were committed to helping her rebuild. The baby had started walking, and the house had become an even more lively place. Toys were scattered across the living room, and there were frequent giggles and little footsteps echoing through the halls. The baby had a way of bringing joy to everyone with his innocent smiles and playful energy. It was impossible not to feel happy when he was around. The little girl, now fully embracing her role as a big sister, was often found holding the baby's hand, guiding him carefully as he wobbled across the floor. She had even taught him a few words: Mama, Dada, and her personal favorite, Please. One day, after a particularly tiring morning of errands, the mother sat down on the couch, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders. The father, noticing her exhaustion, gently asked, "Do you want to take a break?" "I can handle dinner tonight." She smiled faintly, grateful for his offer. "That sounds wonderful, but I think I need to take a moment to breathe." She closed her eyes for a few seconds, letting the silence of the house wash over her. The little girl, noticing her mother's weariness, said, "Mommy, can I give you a hug?" She ran over and hugged her mother tightly, her little arms wrapping around her in a gesture that was more comforting than words could express. The mother's heart swelled with emotion. "Thank you, sweetheart," she said softly. "I needed that." The father watched from the doorway, his heart full. It had been such a long time since he had seen this family dynamic unfold. The love between them was undeniable. And in moments like this, when they supported each other without question, he realized that they had become a true family. Not by blood, but by choice and by their actions. Despite the small stresses of daily life, the family continued to thrive. They found joy in the little things. Quiet evenings together, walks in the park, spontaneous dance parties in the living room. The father often found himself reflecting on how much their lives had changed, how they had come from nothing yet had built something lasting and beautiful. The mother, too, had grown into a confident and capable woman. She had enrolled in a night class to further her education, learning new skills that would help her advance in her job. The father supported her every step of the way, watching with admiration as she balanced the demands of work, school, and motherhood. One evening, after she had returned from her class, the mother collapsed onto the couch, exhausted but happy. "I did it," she said, her voice filled with pride. "I passed my first exam." The little girl cheered, running over to give her mother a big hug. "I knew you could do it, Mommy." The father smiled and joined in the celebration, proud of the woman who had worked so hard to achieve her goals. "You're amazing," he said. This is just the beginning. As the weeks passed, the family grew even closer. The small victories, like passing exams or finding better job opportunities, were celebrated together. But it was the everyday moments, the quiet dinners, the shared laughter, the times they simply sat together and talked, that made their bond unbreakable. One night, as they all sat together on the couch, the little girl turned to her mother and asked, "Mommy, will you always be here?" The mother looked at her with a soft smile. "Yes, sweetheart, I'll always be here," the father added, "and we'll always be here for you. You're never alone." In that moment, the little girl smiled, reassured by the love that surrounded her. It wasn't just the safety of having a roof over her head or food on the table. It was the comfort of knowing that no matter what, she had a family who loved her unconditionally. The mother watched her daughter, her heart swelling with gratitude. She thought back to the dark days when she had felt completely alone, when she had wondered how she could possibly make it. And now here she was in a home filled with love, surrounded by people who cared for her. It had taken time, months, even years, but she had found her way. And while there were still challenges ahead, she no longer feared them. She knew that together, they could face anything. The baby, now a toddler, toddled into the room, his little hands reaching for the father. "Daddy," he said, his voice full of wonder. The father smiled and lifted him up, holding him close. "What is it, buddy?" The toddler giggled, his eyes lighting up with joy. "I love you." The mother's eyes filled with tears as she watched the tender moment. "We all love you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. And in that simple moment, surrounded by love, laughter, and warmth, the family understood that this was what truly mattered. They didn't need a mansion or a perfect life. What they needed, what they had, was each other. And in the end, that was more than enough.